Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Objective, and we've got a special episode for you today. You may know our favorite host, Nikos Sotirakopoulos, has a book that just was released. You can actually currently get it at a discount price. It's from Imprint Publishing, so you got to go to their website, and the discount code is CAT21, like cat meow. People ask, oh, what can I do to make the world a better place? I tell them, get Nikos's new book immediately. It boosts it in the bestseller charts. New people see it, new people buy it. Next thing you know, the world is thinking about things in a whole new way. So we've got.
Let's say to people, the link is on the description. So sorry to interrupt your
link in the description. Absolutely. If you're wondering whose voice that is, it is actually our guest of honor today, Nikos Sotirakopoulos. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Rucka. Although I'm not the guest of honor, so why don't you introduce also the guest?
We've also got one of our favorite, actually, you know what? Scratch that. Our favorite co-host, TVs and TV Talks, Mark Pellegrino.
Hey, but I'm not the guest of honor, so who's...
Nope, still not. Now, we didn't have time for Jonathan Honig. We apologize, but we do have someone who, let me tell you, I started reading this book. I'm looking through it, the acknowledgments at the beginning. I'm thinking, where's I want to thank my co-hosts on the Daily Objective. No mention of them. Unless the part where he says, I want to thank my family. That, I guess that could be us. But who Nikos does thank is Gregory Salmieri. So please welcome Greg Salmieri.
Hi, it's an honor to be here, but this is, I think Nikos is, after all, the guest of honor or the participant of honor today, since this is the day on his book. And I'm really excited to be here to celebrate, promote, call attention to it.
Yes, and you helped Nikos a lot, although it does mention in the acknowledgments, Nikos says, obviously, we do not share the same view on many topics. So Nikos wanted sort of the freedom to express himself the way he sees things. So none of the people who helped him, including Dr. Salmieri, should be considered to be in full agreement with the ideas expressed in this book. I mean, you guys watch this show. I disagree with Nikos 95% of things. I still support this book.
Haven't seen the finished version of it. The last version I saw was in press, and he was still making changes, but it's just so much really helpful information, and it's so thoughtful and well-informed about the causes of current trends that whatever you agree with or disagree with in it, it just puts today, what's going on today in a light that I think most people have no inkling of. Just that, most people look at whatever is in the headlines as we're in this fight now, and maybe you think, and it wasn't this way when I was a kid, but that's about all the context most people bring. And this, what movements, what intellectuals, and what different places over what timelines, how did these things develop? And this is a kind of thinking I think we need a lot more of in the world. And even if it turns out that you disagree with Nikos about some of the causes or some of the history of it, what I know of the history of it, I think he's right about. But even if it turns out that you disagree or he's wrong about something, raising the questions of not looking at everything as an isolated concrete or every faction as a faction that's here today, but thinking of these things as having a history, coming from somewhere and going someplace is really invaluable. And so thank you, Nikos, for giving us so much to think about and giving us so much knowledge.
No, I thank you. And I thank you for many reasons, but I want to throw two things on the table for which Greg can help us understand them better. The first thing, so if I could pick the two biggest intellectual contributions in my mind from my interactions with Greg. And actually, before I say that, how did I end up interacting with Greg? So I'm lucky enough to be involved with the Objectivist Academic Center, which is ARI's intellectual training program. And as a student in the Objectivist Academic Center, you get someone who is, let's say, your mentor. So if you're doing work, creating content, something like writing a book, you get assigned to a mentor. And Greg was my mentor, so he helped me a lot throughout the process of the book. So the two biggest takeaways that I got from Greg, and I want to put them on the table, are first and foremost, what do we mean by left and right? quite often people say, you know what, there is no left and right anymore. Or people say, no, there is a left and right, because you can't tell this person is left and this person is right. And Greg helped me understand this in a way that, look, left and right is not so much about ideas. Left and right is first and foremost about teams. There's team left and team right. And because these teams, they see themselves as what we describe in the book as tribes, you can have the weird thing that the left might change some of its views. Some of its views might be more met in the other side, but people don't switch sides. They don't say, oh, we used to be free speech, now we're against free speech, therefore I need to jump boat. I mean, some people do that, but most people don't. So left and right are to be understood more as teams. And the second thing that Greg helped me understand was how tribalism is first and foremost an epistemological phenomenon, which is not an instinct. So the biggest parts of the bibliography on tribalism describes it as something which is, you have it within you. It's in your DNA. You have a tendency to it. And Greg said, no, this is not a proper reading of tribalism. So Greg, do you want to elaborate on these two things? What is left and right, and how tribalism is, at the end of the day, an epistemological choice?
Yeah, well, I mean, the way I would put it is, let's start with the second of those first, because that helps to explain left and right and a lot of other phenomena in our society. So the way I think of it, there's a decision, are you, well, let's put it another way. So Ayn Rand, when she was writing psychology notes back in the 50s, she was writing notes on kind of like, what are the fundamental determinants of a person's way of thinking, of a person's psychoepistemology, she would later call it, their way of relating to the world cognitively. And one of the things that she saw as a really basic alternative in people's psychology is, do you have a reality first or a people first orientation? Are you're looking at the facts, there's a world outside of you, you're a mind, you're trying to be in touch with the world. And then in that world, there are other people, and they're one of the things you're trying to be in touch with. And maybe you could learn facts from them about things or whatever, but they're primarily out there in the world, things to know about, and your mind is your own, and you're trying to know the world, versus you're oriented to people, and people are part of your means of cognition. They're part of your means of knowing the world, not because you might learn something from them, which you then have to think through and evaluate on your own, but rather all of your thinking goes through them. They're part of how you process information, basically. Is the world filtered through other people for you, or are you primarily trying to understand the world, and then people are part of what you understand in the world, and they can then help you understand other things? So reality or people first. And the right, healthy, and moral approach is the reality first approach. You might have internalized some of the people first approach. Everyone does, because it's kind of in the air. So you don't say you're immoral if you've got some of that in your psychology, but you want to work to focus on reality first. And abstract ideas are how we understand reality, particularly on a grand scale thing. So things like, is capitalism good or bad? Is rationality a virtue? Is honesty a virtue? Should you prioritize leading the best life you can for yourself, being rationally selfish, fulfilling your own interest and achieving your own values? Or rather, is goodness about sacrificing yourself to others? These are all questions you could ask about reality and understanding what's good or bad in reality. And having come to conclusions on these and other questions about which countries are better and which countries are worse, which policies are better and which policies are worse, you might then form into groups of people and work together to promote different ideas. And so if you're doing that, if you're on a reality first perspective, you may have many alliances, many groups you're in, either to promote ideas or just to enjoy hobbies or whatever it is, but you're in the groups because of the ideas and values you formed. And you're joining a group because you think the other people in that group share your same ideas and values, and you're working together on them. Maybe not all of your same ideas and values, but enough to make this a profitable cooperation for you. The other alternative, though, is if you're on a people first mindset. And in that case, your ideas are really a function of the people you're around, the tribes you're loyal to, the people who seem like your group as opposed to the end. You're afraid of the world and of facing, and you find it something you really can't understand, and you seek safety in whatever kind of cluster of people you cling to. And if you do that, then you're still likely going to, you may join into groups of people. Maybe they're ideological groups or groups that have a cause. But the attachment to the cause or to the policies or to the whatever ideas are in that group are going to be posterior to you, to your attachment to the people. You're loyal to the people, and so, or to the group, and so loyal, therefore, to whatever ideas or values they espouse, rather than being loyal to certain people or, in with certain people because you share ideas and values that you've come to on your own and understand on your own. And I think that difference between an independent, first-handed valuing and thinking and valuing in politics, and then forming relationships with people around that, and on the other hand, the being in some group and forming values and ideas around that, is the real difference between an individualist versus a tribalist approach epistemologically to politics, to life, to movement. And I think both of these things are open to all of us. By default, if they don't think about it, people tend to fall into what's easier and what's more around them, which is too often the tribal approach. And I think if you think about left and right as these things exist in America today, in the UK today, in other countries, Israel, in China for that matter, they're primarily tribal alliances. And I'm in with this group of people. We have this group of people we dislike. We have some policies we're for, but they don't really fit together that well. There's no kind of essence that combines them other than the historical fact of we formed this coalition and that got into it. And the policies change surprisingly quickly without the people changing all that much. And that's what I think left and right today are about in most places.
Mark, do you have any thoughts on this whole left versus right and various, are people primarily motivated by ideology in these two camps, or is it just really about the camp first and then ideology? Any thoughts occur to you as someone who's constantly out there fighting the left while also being lumped in with, maybe the right?
I definitely think the ideologies are a function of their tribal sympathies, to be honest with you, and those rationalize their tribal sympathies. But primarily, it's definitely a tribal element. I agree with Greg, and I think do you define? I was trying to formulate a question when you surprised me. That's why I was so shocked. But do you Greg or Nikos, do you formulate any ideas about what the left and right represent, and have the left and right been, even though the particular issues that they espouse can shift and change over time, is there something generally that defines the left and the right over time?
Nikos, do you want to feel that one?
Yes. So the one thing that defines them more at the core is the issue of, I think, historical reference and continuity more than anything on the essence. Because on the essence, you could take, for example, the issue of egalitarianism. So particularly many in today, what we describe reactionary rights or traditionalist right, they would say the first question you ask is everyone equal? Not in terms of rights, but equal in terms of, skills or predicted outcomes. And supposedly the left is going to say yes, and therefore every inequality is the result of a systemic factor. The right is going to say no, and any result will be the result of individual differences, or in some parts of the right is going to say group differences because they believe that some groups are more clever than others, or some cultures or ethnic groups, there's a question mark there, they're better prepared, let's say, for good ideas or bad ideas. So you could say that this is the way that you can define it, but for me it mostly has to do with, again, what is your historical reference? Because as Greg said, we see them switching positions in so many big issues that it's difficult to put your finger and say, this is the dividing line between the left and right. So think, for example, about Donald Trump saying, this country is never going to become a socialist country. So you say, okay, this guy is against socialism. And then very soon saying, when I become president again, I'm going to consider doing what was the country that banned Facebook? Nigeria? Well, I'm not sure. We had a whole episode on that, but I forgot the country. So in the same breath, you have someone.
I want to say it was Australia, but I could be wrong.
No, Nigeria.
That was another situation.
Okay.
Sorry, Twitter, not Facebook, Twitter. So there was a country that banned Twitter because it considered one of the tweets of the president of the country as something which was offensive or something like that. So Trump gave out a whole communique, because now he's not on Twitter, and said, interesting point, when maybe in 2024 we're going to think about it. So you have the guy who says we're never going to become socialists, saying the government needs to intervene versus with big tech. So it's very difficult to say, okay, what is the distinctive line? So maybe if I had to pick one issue, I would say the issue of whether inequalities are a result of individual or group traits, or if it's a result of systemic inequality, although this is most has to do with parts of the right that are more fringe than your average conservative in the Congress. But let's hear from... by mentioning inequality, I need to mention something else. Go check Mark's new video. He has this new series, which I call Philosophy for the Masses, how it's called, Reality Check. So go on YouTube, put Marco Pellegrino Reality Check. The last video is on this topic of equality and inequality and what real inequality means. So I just watched it a couple of hours ago. It's a good one. So go check this channel and subscribe to Mark. His Philosophy for the Masses video are great. Greg.
I think there are a few ideologies on the left and the right that are kind of vying for allegiance. And then there are slews of particular positions. There's socialism, of course, on the left. The right has been about, 2 parts per million less socialist than the left in America for 40 years now, or longer. They're not, they claim to be against socialized medicine, but they're not against Medicare, which is socialized medicine. And you can't be against it unless you're against Medicare. And likewise in every other area. So they want to keep the socialism that we already have, but they don't want the next tiny increment, or they want half of the next tiny increment. So you have the kind of socialism on the left, and that's maybe represented best among mainstreamish people on the left by Bernie Sanders. I say mainstreamish because he's an elected official. You can find someone who's, a blogger who's way more socialist than him. And kind of socialist-y politics, economic policies like Elizabeth Warren, who won't call herself a socialist, but isn't that different from Sanders. So there's that kind of side of the left. And then there's increasingly, since the 1960s, the kind of less economic focused new left that's more obsessed with, or more focused on, let's just say, race-based and other identity-based grouped issues. You might call them the social justice left or the woke left or the that sort of segment of the left. And there's, I think, a real difference between those two segments of them, both of which I think are based around poisonous ideologies, but they're different ones. And so, I don't know, Cornel West, and who I would put on the socialist side, and the guy, I'm just blanking on his name, who wrote Anti-Racism, Kendi, are, they're just, these guys have different views. They're both what are classed as leftist views, and they're both bad views, but they're not the same as each other. And if you could imagine a country where those were the two political parties warring at one another, maybe we'll end up there. I hope not. And then if you look at the right, you have some smaller and smaller subset of them whose main thing is opposing socialism. They're not really for capitalism, any of them, but Paul Ryan or someone like that, who's really a kind of budget hawk and such like that. And you get people like this. You have the social issue religious right, whose main animating issue is preventing people from getting abortions and otherwise getting in place laws that they see as promoting a culture of life, but really amount to having a mystical conception of human life and denying freedom. So there's that subsection of the right. And then more and more, there's a kind of nationalist protectionist right, which is a kind of collectivist, it's a workers focused collectivism. It's what leftists of an earlier generation who were focused on unions, right, were really for. And interestingly, is not so different from what the Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren left want economically, but this is their kind of focus. So we're skeptical of other countries, we are anti-immigration, we're anti-trade, or rather we say we're anti-illegal immigration, but we're actually anti-immigration in general. We're very skeptical of free trade and free trade agreement. We want America first, meaning American workers first, meaning America's economy, having policies that try to favor America's economy, intervening in trade to favor America's economy more. And then so I would say those three bits of the right, the now very, very marginalized economic or pro-capital or anti-socialist right, let's call it that, the religious right, and the more nationalist protectionist right, I would say are now the three mainstream parts of the right. And then if you want to go to the fringier parts of the right, you would get the really racist kind of people who they are protectionist, but their main issue is that they want, white power or white people. And I think that's still a very fringe kind of element, but less so, unfortunately, than it was 10 or 20 years ago. And then the other, there's a whole other issue about the role of conspiracy theory thinking on both sides of this, but that's another issue.
I feel like there has been a consistency despite all this craziness of what the left and right represent since their beginning, which I take to be France. I take it to be the French Revolution is sort of what gave us this notion of the left and the right. And ever since then, we have basically these two tribes, one of which considers itself radically egalitarian, which I would consider the left, and all of the insanity that's being produced in the left and all those crazy ideas can seem to come under that tent of radical egalitarianism. And what I see on the right is tradition worship. And the tradition, sometimes expands out with a new policy that the left is able to push through that widens the tent, so to speak, of tradition to include aspects of socialism. But it seems to me that would you say that is an accurate sort of generalization about what defines the left and the right as consistently through the years?
Somewhat, but particularly in America and maybe Western Europe. But like if you think about what counts as the left versus the right in China, now maybe we just shouldn't be using those terms there, but I'm not sure that would be how you would think about it. And yet there is some kind of parallelism or isomorphism. So I do think the main kind of leftist idea is a kind of egalitarianism that takes different forms. But there's also a more and more a kind of egalitarianism in right-wing politics. And it's not the first wave that we've seen of it, a kind of anti-elitism, right? And you associate certain ideas with the elite, but the common man and these coastal people who are, Hollywood and London and so forth and wherever, I guess I'm in Texas and Rucka's in Texas today, so maybe we count it as the real people. But the coastal elites and the cities and the rich people and so forth versus us common men, we're the real Americans and so forth. That's a kind of egalitarianism, and you see it in a number of places on the right. So I don't think that analysis seems more right to me about 10 years ago than it is now, but there's still definitely elements of it. And the left is definitely more explicitly egalitarian than the right is.
And just to say that in the book, there is a historical overview on where are these groups that we find today in the left and in the right, where do they come from? What are their ideological predecessors? And is it actually true that what we see today as the so-called woke left or the social justice left, is this really a follow-up from Marxism? And spoiler alert, the answer is not really. And also to remind people today with the code CAT21, you can get the book with a 30% discount, but not from Amazon, from the website of the publisher, Imprint Publishing. You can go there, you'll find the book, and it's gonna ask you for a code. The code is CAT21, cat like the thing with the 4 legs. Of course, you can buy it for Amazon for full price if you feel, that you have. The book the price is quite reasonable. It's £14, the paperback, and I think £10, the Kindle version. So anyway,
so maybe regular daily objectivist viewers have heard a lot about this book so far, but I don't get to listen daily. But I don't know that they all will have. I haven't heard that much about it since back when we were, I was reading the drafts of it. So do you want to say a little bit more for anyone who doesn't know about just what the book is, what's the essence of it, what are the main subdivisions, what can people expect to learn?
So the book in a way, so I tried to reach a balance, which again, it was through so Greg basically told me in one discussion, look, you have an advantage. You've been a tribalist, of a strong tribalist in your past. So why don't you bring this experience forward? And how about you make sure that you make clear that the distinction is not between tribalism and let's meet somewhere in the middle. The distinction is between wrong thinking and right thinking. So this is not a book that says that because tribalism is wrong, we need to not fight too much and we need to meet in the middle. So what to expect? So the first thing to expect is this point of view that understands what tribalism is, because I was a big one. And according to many people and some introspection, I still am in some way. So it includes my experience from the political, let's say, from my political past, but also it follows this. So the main idea is, how can we connect the threads of all the things that we see today out there? We see controversies on campus about free speech. We see people disagreeing about race. These days it's about footballers kneeling and doing the BLM thing. It's about critical race theory or white nationalism. So many people tend to think that there's one thing that is wrong in today's world and it's the other side. But if you check the two sides, let's say feminists and the men's rights movement or the MGTOWs, or if you check the critical race theorists and the white nationalists, or if you check the free speech people versus the cancel people, you will notice many things that they have in common. So since they have things in common, it means that the source of everything which is bad cannot be, oh, the other side is bad. They must have something in common. And what they have in common is a way of thinking. So the book tries to find out, what is this way of thinking? Where does it come from? And also, how can we trace its roots? Its historical roots in the left and its historical roots on the right. And once we've done this, then we take the three case studies, free speech, race, and gender, and we see how it applies. So you're gonna like this book if you like politics and history in terms of where do ideas come from. You're like this book if you want to have an understanding of, let's say, a bird's eye view on the culture today, on the culture wars today. And on a more personal note, I think you'll like this book if you enjoy our discussions, or if you enjoy the way I view things and how I like to draw parallels with culture, with history, with sports. There's a bit of all that in the book. So I try to make sure that the book is rigorous in terms of its academic quality, but also that it has a bit of a personal touch that I enjoy in the way I approach things, and I hope that people enjoy as well.
I'm enjoying it so far. I feel like I'm reading it in your voice, Nikos, and your
That's
accent.
the other thing. If the book sells well, I've said my publisher, if the book sells well, we're doing an Audible with my accent. So here's another reason why you need to buy the book. Again, discount code for today, CAT21 from the publisher website. Let's make it sell well. So there's an Audible with a good Greek accent, and it's going to.
Does that mean you're doing the Audible, or you're hiring another Greek to do it?
Obviously, I'm doing the Audible.
Okay.
Why would I hire someone else to do it? That's
All
the
right.
competitive advantage of the Greek accent.
If you get a really good actor, Mark maybe could do it. You know?
With the accent.
With the accent, that would be great. I'm actually going to be ordering this right now. Could you hold it up one more time for me, Nikos?
Yeah, just say the title, because it might be a little hard for people to see. Or
The title is Identity Politics and Tribalism, the New Culture Wars. Identity Politics and Tribalism, the New Culture Wars.
In other circumstances, we'd say people could just search on your name, but I think this is easier to spell. So.
Yes, I have another book which is expensive. The first book, that's because it was with an academic publisher. So from the two books I have, the one that looks like that, that's a tribalist book.
Identity Politics and Tribalism, the New Culture Wars.
Yes, and also let me say a big thank you also. Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's the one. Let me also say a big thank you to my publisher, because in the times we live in, it's not easy to buy such a book. The publication of this book could be an episode of its own, but I don't want to do the Trumpian right thing. Oh, I got canceled and the left is persecuting me. But let me say just again, my publisher had the guts to go with a book that could be not 100% according to the orthodox Overton window of view. So I'm very thankful to the publisher for taking a chance with it.
And speaking of fighting the left, we've got some super chats, as I like to remind the audience. Super chatting us money is the best way to fight the left, and the higher your super chat, the more you beat the left. Thank you, Mary-Aline, Jonathan Honig, Gail, Robert, LMH, Regina, and Phil with £5 says, so is a tribe a community or vice versa or both?
Very important.
I think Nico, this is him saying, I think Nikos sees safety from states or seeks safety from states within communities. I'm not, can an introvert really like communities? Maybe that's the essence of the question. What is the relationship between the individual and the community? And is a community the same thing as a tribe?
Okay, thank you. That's a great question. The number one possible misunderstanding that one can get from the book is to say that this is an attack on the idea of communities or the attack of the idea of solidarity or of networks. No, almost the whole conclusion is about that. So not only tribalism is not the same thing as a community. I would say you cannot have a good community if you're a tribalist. Here's why. What is the most important thing in a community? You need to have people who are capable of being good parts of the community. You need to have people who have some personality, some character, some essence. If you take a lot of zeros and you add a lot of zeros, the result is still zero. So unless you're an individual with your own thinking, someone who can appreciate others around them. So let's say we form a community because we like each other. That's going to be a strong community. Or let's say I like the fact that I have a community, let's say with my brother-in-law or even people from my family, not only because they're my family, but because I like them. So communities are super important. Networks of solidarity are super important. All of these things are important. But tribalism is something else. Tribalism is my point of reference is the community. So I don't judge with my mind, I judge with the community mind, which means if the community goes wrong, if the community goes rogue, I'm not going to tell them, hey, people, boundaries. We didn't start like that. No, the community is always right. Think about the Bolsheviks. Think about the Bolsheviks and how when they would go completely away, even from within their context, from where they began, supposedly, let's say the idealists, the tribalists will say, well, I'm part of the group, so I need to sacrifice my judgment for the group. Whereas the individualist, the person with individual judgment will say, no, I judge that this group is going wrong. Therefore, either I have to put it on the right path or I'm going to leave. Because your allegiance is first and foremost to your judgment and your values, and then to the community. And that's the only way to have a strong community or a strong romantic relationship or a strong friendship. Imagine being friends with someone and say, well, I'm friends with you because life put us together. I don't see anything in you, but well, that's how, we are stuck here together. Therefore, let's be good friends. So no, community and tribalism are actually opposite. So a strong individual judgment and a strong focus on, I want to make sure I understand the world and I follow my judgment is the prerequisite for a strong community. But let's also hear Greg's take on that.
Yeah, I would add, I agree definitely with Nikos. And as you said that, an example of someone came to mind who's just dead wrong on this, according to the people who defend him. Like he's a perfect example of the wrong side of it, which is Robert E. Lee, the Confederate general. Some people talk about him as saying, well, he wasn't really pro-slavery. I think he owned slavery, but anyway, he wasn't about slavery. He wasn't in favor of a war to defend slavery, but he just so loved Virginia. Virginia was his community, that I have to be on the Virginia side, because he had been offered the command of the Union Army and he turned it down at one point, or at least that's my understanding. Suppose all that is true about him, and suppose he really hoped for a Confederate States of America that would eventually get rid of slavery, and he was against slavery or whatever it was. I don't think all these things are true, but suppose they are. What he's saying is, my country, right or wrong, it's going wrong. I think it's wrong, but I'm with it anyway. And that's the tribalist mindset. That's the wrong mindset. And again, I think that's even too positive in some ways and beautifully, but supposing it was right, it would still really, I think, be damning about somebody. I'm with Virginia no matter what. And I'll warp my thinking and my actions and the way I live my life to support this group, even when they're in the wrong. on the very issue that they're in the wrong about. It's not like the war was about something else, because we all know it was about slavery. There's one other point that I'd like to add to the idea of tribes and communities. So there's another one, the I think ultimate legitimate basis for community of any kind is shared ideas and values. You have the shared ideas and values first, and then you get into a community with people. And of course, that you were raised with certain people and so forth could set you up to have those shared ideas and values. But you still have to think about them and judge them for yourself. But there's one other factor, which is shared plight. And I think this is important, and it's an important kind of intermediate factor that really does justify and make rational some groups that you might belong to. But you really have to be careful about it, because it slides into tribalism very easily. So take Israel. And two of you guys are from Israel on the line. But Israel is a country that was founded because Jews were persecuted all over the world. And you might have thought, I don't know that I share ideas with all these other Jews. Judaism to me isn't my religion that I share. It's just the ethnic group I belong to or the race I belong to. And I wouldn't really want all that much in common necessarily with everyone who's Jewish. But the Nazis don't seem to care about that. They're going to kill me because I'm of Jewish ancestry wherever I am. I have a problem in common with all these other people because we're Jewish. It's not that we chose anything that gave us this problem, but other people see us as Jewish and they want to kill us. So we have a common need for defense. And so we're going to get together and we need to form a country, because only with a country like this can we be safe. And it's not like I could even renounce my Judaism and get away from it. Hitler didn't care about that. And there are other people who did pogroms and so forth, and they don't care about that. So we have this real reason to fear other people because they're prejudiced against us. We need to unite together for defense. And there are a lot of kinds of cases in which that could be true. Think about, I think that gives if you think about the various Black nationalist movements that there have been in America, and you think about particularly the ones earlier on, like the Garveyite movement, and even prior to that, the people were being lynched, killed, shot. Even after slavery, they were not free. Right? And you think maybe, I don't agree with every other Black guy at MIT, but we've got this common problem, right? We are commonly victims of people. We need to group together for self-defense. And then within the grouping together for self-defense, we'll argue about what the right policies are. And of course, among Jews, including Jews who founded Israel, there were all kinds of disagreements, and likewise among the various Black groups, even among the Black nationalists, much less among the the groups that formed the NAACP, for example. Right? And you can come up with all kinds of examples. Those are the most two dramatic, where these people really did have something to fear and a reason to group together. But there are lots of people who think they do, right or wrong, and maybe right to some extent, but they exaggerate it, think that we have a need to join up for defense against a common enemy. And that is sometimes real. And then it's a rational value for all the people to have. We have to be solidarity against the Nazis, remember, is a rational value. But insofar as the basis for the community is defense against an enemy that's grouping you together irrationally, I think you really have to be careful that you're clear about why you're in it and that you're thinking independently about whether this defense alliance is good and what direction it should take and so forth, because it can very quickly become, the kinds of fractured, the Latina lesbian alliance against cis, where you have very small groups who think that they, defined by many different characteristics, who think that their interests are always under attack. And in some cases, they might actually be real victims of certain inequities, but they think the way to deal with them is to gang up into pressure groups and then form these alliances among pressure groups. And often that is destructive and breeds into tribalism. And so I think if you think about the most sympathetic take on various groups we'd identify as tribalists, how do they think of themselves? They think, well, we've got to be in this group. We're the proletarians, or we're the colonized peoples, or where the whatever it is, and no one's got our back except others like us. And there are cases in which that's true, and yet tribalism is self-destructive. It isn't. It amounts to giving up your mind, and it amounts to not being able to think about what a productive solution to your problems are, and guaranteeing that you'll always be at war with everybody else. So it's not the right answer. And yet, if you actually are in that put-upon group, you have to think about how to do it. And if you look at the rhetoric from the right now. It's the same kind of rhetoric. Like you find these memes of Trump where he's standing there. It's not me they hate, it's you, right? And I'm here defending you against the people who want to persecute you. Or there's a war against Christmas or against Christians or against this or against that. And so you should see yourself as put upon and needing to band together with other people who are likewise put upon. And there's some truth to some of those claims, but less truth, I think, there is than the claim that the Jews had something to be worried about or the blacks did. But some truth, and you have to think about how to deal with those problems rationally.
Whenever people are galvanizing around a problem, it's important that somebody asks, well, what's the end goal? What's the solution? So if the Zionists had individualism as their explicit goal, then I think Israel could have been even a much bigger success than it already is, like economically and all that, and been very secure and very prosperous, and ultimately probably ended up just kind of dispensing with the whole like Jewish identity as a national cause, probably because the safety and prosperity would be so secure that they might have been able to move past that. I know that's kind of a hypothetical, but generally, I mean, with the response to the left in recent years, it's amazing to me how the response to the identitarian left has increasingly been more identitarianism and tribalism. And that's what I like about Nikos's book. And as I'm looking at the chapters, right off the bat, he's challenging the idea that tribalism is something we're wired for, because this is what you hear from the right. Like we're basically cavemen. Like that's the essence of the human experience, cavemen and tribes living in the most uncomfortable stretch of time, the most stagnant form of human existence, living in tribes. Like that's what being a human is all about. And that's what we're wired to do. So we need to find a way to get back to that in the modern world. And Nikos is challenging that. And he's challenging the assertion that the left are all communists. Nikos knows what communism is. So there's a lot of premises that people on the anti-left are holding that Nikos is challenging. Got a few more super chats. Just Emily, Zalmi, thank you. Thank you, Jeff. And thank you, Marilene. Back to you, Greg.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the left aren't all communists isn't to let them off the hook or praise them. Communism's not the only really bad thing. And if you lump all the left together as the same bad thing, you'll misunderstand what the threats are, where they're coming from. So it's true, the left aren't all communists. It's not saying, they're any great shakes. And it's just like saying the right aren't all fascists. And it's true, the right aren't all fascists or racists or religionists or any other bad thing. But that doesn't mean that the ones who aren't bad. And it doesn't mean that there aren't moderate ones among the ones who aren't on each side who are better than most, but still have some bad ideas that are, to do with the larger groups that they're part of. There are, moderate milk toasty people who have some mix of reasonable views and with unreasonable views of various sorts on all across the political.
And they might be worse than communists in some respect. They might be so destructive, some of these leftists, or maybe a lot of them, intellectually what they want is arguably even worse than the communist cause. So I was only saying, making the point that Nikos makes in his book here is that they're not literally communists. So he's standing up against a popular saying on the right. Nikos or Mark, any thoughts?
Well, I'll let Mark, because I've talked a lot today.
No, I can't wait to read the book. So it's on its way.
Thanks,
I
Mark.
wouldn't be surprised as to how many of the people who are opposing the wokey type of leftism today, whatever you want to call that, the identity-focused leftism, are communists, literal communists, who are opposed to that. And in some cases, some of what they say in opposition to the identity politics stuff is good, but there's also a lot bad in those people. They are literal communists, some of them.
Even with these people. So, for example, Zizek. I would say that even Zizek is not a communist. If you see his actual politics, when it comes down to, okay, now it's the time of crisis, what are you going to do? I would say that even people like Zizek are not real communists, but anyway, that's for another discussion. Let me remind to people that in 14 minutes, my publisher has organized a Reddit Ask Me Anything. Now I'm a complete, I'm like this meme with a guy sitting in front of the computer with the mic. I have no idea what Reddit is. They just told me, hold this thing and people will understand. So I'm at das imprint publishing. So
those are slashes, not dashes.
Slash, not dash. Okay. /imprint publishing. That's where I'm gonna be for an hour, starting 13 minutes from now, for a Reddit Ask Me Anything. So if you have more questions and you haven't asked them on the super chat, I'll be there. So some more announcements about what's happening from now on. So at 8 o'clock UK, 8 o'clock UK time. So we have HBTV 8. We have Harry Binswanger, and today his topic is Nations Don't Compete, which is interesting because it's one day after the final of the Euro 2021. But he's going to talk about nations competing in things like trade. So as Greg said, today the right is big on, we're losing to China, Tucker Carlson, Trump, they're big on this thing. So Harry's going to check whether this makes sense. Then 7 o'clock in 12 minutes in Clubhouse, we have Physics by Phone with Amanda Maxam. So am I missing anything? Tomorrow there's no Yaron Debate Europe because Yaron is on a trip. So he's going to be back in 2 weeks. So, okay, let's wrap it up. And one last question to Greg. Maybe it's not a great question because I'm putting you on the spot, but from all these expressions, let's say, of tribalism that we've discussed, is there one particular that you expect it's going to gain ground? And is there one particular which you expect it's going to has the most chances of success in terms of how it can tune in with people? So, for example, I don't expect that the so-called quote woke thing is gonna be here around for decades because it cannot really get a hook with people. I predict, who knows? So, Greg, do you have any good or bad predictions about where this thing's gonna end?
I also predict that the kind of intensity of the woke identity politics that we're seeing now will fade. I don't think it's going to keep on ratcheting up like it's been for even another couple of years. I think we're probably at the peak of this. That doesn't mean that it's going to go back to being as small a force as it was 10 or 15 years ago. I think it'll die down to a baseline of higher than it was, but less than it is now. I'm not super confident in that prediction, but that's my sense of it. Just based on the fact that it's so divisive and so much about a minority of people, and so many of the minority of that people think it's a mistake, that I don't think it has it's got sufficient legs. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. I am, however, on the other side, the kind of cult of resentment and personality that is around Trump, which is a purely tribal phenomenon, I think has persisted and grown longer than I thought it would, and it gotten worse. So I don't know where that's headed, but I think that's the scarier because of how quickly it became such a big deal on the right versus he was like a minor figure. So the speed of the ascendancy of that and it not having waned at several things that I thought would be breakers for it or might be breakers for it, I find particularly troubling. So that's the tribal phenomenon. It's obviously not going to continue forever just about this one guy. But so I think what we want to see is once he fades from being the central lightning rod of politics, what does right-wing politics look like? And it won't look like it does now. It'll settle down into being a little bit more, I assume, about some issues as opposed to just about personalities. But what will they be? And I fear it'll be all the wrong issues. Hating on social media, which is already a big leftist cause celeb for a long time. And now it's the major thing that seems to animate so much of the right. I think that is a really dangerous factor. And anti-trade, are those the things? Or will there be any positive things left on the agenda of the right other than pushing back on leftist bad things, and which leftist bad things will they be interested in pushing back on? Will they be the ones that most need pushing back on or not? I fear not. So that's the one that has outperformed my expectations in getting worse quicker than I thought it would. I had thought around after 2008, I thought the leftism would get worse than it has, in fact. We've seen major flare-ups and horrors on the kind of fringes. We've seen a mainstream endorsement of like Black Lives Matter protests, and which then way too often turned into violent mobs. But we didn't see much endorsement of it once it turned into violent mobs. There was kind of demurring from that. That was too half-hearted, but still demurring. And we didn't see the number of extreme fringy leftist figures take over the mainstream of the political party as quickly as I thought we would. I thought we would get a more AOC-like or Bernie Sanders-like presidential nominee, for example. Like if you had asked me if you'd asked me in early 2017, what was the 2020 election going to look like? I thought it was pretty likely we'd have, Bernie Sanders or something as the candidate. I think it's a somewhat hopeful sign, not that Biden is any great shakes, but that the kind of worst of the leftists haven't as quickly taken over the center of the party as I was worried they would have. I still think they're, moving in that direction eventually, but it's a slower speed up there than I feared and a faster speed up on the right than I had feared. So that's where I am right now, but we all have got to see how this plays out, and I don't have any kind of.
Does it appear to you that Biden's slowing down the left? It seems like the left is still getting pretty much everything that it wants, and OAC and Bernie Sanders are still the top money makers in the Democratic Party. So I feel like perhaps your prediction is coming true just behind the scenes.
Well, they can't really pass very much. They have a half and half Congress. I think it would be a better test of what was happening if they had a congressional majority, or a larger congressional majority where they could pass some things with just a few Republican votes. But then I think when you're unable to pass things, right, then a lot of what you do is signaling to the base. So if you look at the Republicans, right, when they had the House but didn't have the Senate during parts of Obama's presidency, there were all kinds of repeal Obamacare, do all this, cut that kind of bills that got passed when it was just virtue signaling to their base about what they wanted. They had both houses of Congress. They didn't do a damn thing, right, about any of that. Now they did cut taxes and cut the corporate tax rate, which I think is a very good thing and the best thing that happened during that presidency. But that was it, right? So yeah, so now the test of what a Biden in power would be is if they had, not quite enough votes to beat a filibuster, but enough, they only needed a few. And then I think in that situation, there would be a lot more pressure to come to a consensus view within the party than we're having. The AOC wing is still kind of powerful, but they're not as powerful as I thought they'd be, and they're not getting as much as I thought they'd get. We'll see how it plays out. They're definitely dangerous. And definitely the policies that are going to get passed, the tax plan, if it gets passed, and what happens through reconciliation will be bad. It's just, I don't think we want to burn down the country bad. I think it's,
So that if you think how every new wave of, if you think how every new wave of university graduates is actually going to add fuel to the culture wars, maybe I'm a bit less optimistic than I am here 5 minutes ago when I say, well, I don't see this having legs. But anyway, there's a lot.
I do predict this getting worse on both sides for a while. It's just, what's the pace? And I don't think, like, if we're going to flame out into a race war or something like that over the kind of things that are being pushed by the wokey crowd and then the reactions to it by right wingers, I think things will get better and then worse again before we end up in a kind of war in the street. So the point isn't that long term we're on a good trajectory. We're not. It's just, I don't think this is the final wave of bad from the leftist side. I think it'll crest and then come back stronger if more isn't done to give an alternative to it. It's harder to say where we are on the right wing side. I suspect too it'll crest and then come back again stronger. But I don't think we're at the crest of it yet on the right, or I'm not sure we are. I'm less convinced we're at or past the crest of it on the right than I am that we're at or past the crest of the recent wave of badness on the left. But the waves are going to keep coming bigger and stronger on both sides unless there's a kind of fundamental shift towards embracing reason and rationality and anti-tribalism in the culture. And there are kind of premonitory signs of that, I should say. They've got problems with them and so forth, but there's, I think the kind of rationality, pro-enlightenment movement, the kind of thing that you can see people like Steven Pinker being a part of despite all his problems, Sam Harris being a part of despite all his problems, Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter, what's going on in Barry Weiss. I mean, there's a kind of, all of these people have, or most of them have too much of we're moderates, and that's part of our being rational focus to them. But they do have a kind of wanting to back away from tribalism. You need to think for yourself. We have to turn down the temperature. It's important to have discussion where different sides are heard. There's something really right about the liberal tradition that's being lost. And, you know, how powerful that movement gets and how big a voice it gets. I don't think that's the movement that can turn the country around altogether. I think you need more radicalism than that movement has. But that movement, if it gets strong enough, could be a pretty big retarding feature. In the way that the kind of swing to the right of the 80s really was the 70s that led to Thatcher in England and
Reagan
in America, but a lot of the changes were underway before him. You know, bought us a lot of time. So that's the thing I'm most hopeful about is that movement.
And don't forget hopeful signs like Nikos over here just a few years ago probably hardly knew what objectivism was, and now he's published a book highly informed by objectivism where he's challenging a lot of common assertions and offering a positive alternative. So everybody go to Imprint Publishing's website, link in the description, use discount code CAT21 to save a few bucks and, you know, help this thing grow. And thank you, Corey and Christopher, for the super chats. Thank you, LMF, for the super chat. Coming up in 1 minute, ask Nikos anything on Reddit. The link is on his Twitter or Instagram. The info about that is on his Instagram or Twitter. So hurry over there and ask him anything you like. He'll answer anything, evidently.
Okay.
However you buy it, give us the title again. Identity Politics.
Identity Politics and Tribalism, the New Culture Wars. Identity Politics and Tribalism, the New Culture Wars. So, gentlemen,
all that title is missing is maybe like the word sex to be the most like algorithm friendly word on Google. So I'm really hopeful for this book.
You got it in one of the chapter titles, right?
Sorry?
Sex, gender, feminism. Absolutely. Yeah, he's got all the buzzwords. So this is going to be a big one, guys. Get it before it sells out, everybody. Please hurry up.
Okay, and let me say a huge thank you to all three of you for your time. And I really appreciate it. And a big thank you to the people who have watched this and who have bought the book. I hope it's going to be a good company and it's going to offer value. Okay, thanks, everyone. All the best and see you tomorrow. And again, a huge thank you to all of you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, man. Good luck.
Thanks.